Hello. We're going to be talking about problem solving with C++, Walter Savitch, 10th edition. Right now, we're going to talk about multi-way branching. That's section 2 of chapter 3. I'm going to do this in 2 parts with the request of the students having it shorter videos. Again, I'm not covering everything in this section. I'm just picking up some areas. So for students, you have to read the whole section. Not everything is covered in these videos. So this is going to be the part 1 of 2 parts for section 2. So when we're talking about multi-branching, so you can look at some street signs that you get there. Some of them are going to be a little more confusing than the other ones. And when you get to some intersection, it might be just 2-way. You can go to one or the other one. And some places you might have a multiple directions. So you can go to more than one. So if a statement is a branching mechanism, that means that you can go from one location to the other one. Actually, the memory jumps somewhere else beside your code. It's not following it. And then it comes back when it's done. We're not going to go through the details of those things. So we just want to talk about the multi-way branching right now. Another thing that we can talk about is for everything that we're talking about here, if a statement, we talk about while loop, you can have a for later on, we're going to talk about switch. So any of these things can contain the other ones. So just because I have a if statement doesn't mean I cannot have if statement inside the if statement. From the software engineering point of view, is if you are going 3 level deep, that's enough. You don't want to go too many levels in because it's going to be very confusing to follow the code. Just have that in the back of your mind. So we are talking about indenting your code for each level to make it easier to read. So for example, in this code we're talking about, so I have an if statement over here, I have another if statement, and of course, 2 of these. Now, first thing first, remember when we talked about braces, when you have one statement, you don't need braces. So in this case, because all of these things are kind of connected to each other, you don't need braces. So for this if statement, there is only one statement, which is this if statement. And for this if statement, if it's true, only one statement. If it's false, it's only one statement. So first thing first, when you go to the next block, you want to indent it. So it's going to be much easier to read. So I can follow this by just looking at it and know where this is supposed to go. So if you look at it in here, we are going to be indenting as we go to the lower level ones. Be sure you do that. That's part of 2.5, which I ask you guys to read it and read it and read it again to be sure you understand the style for writing. Let's look at if-else statement. Before we move on, I'm going to be talking about a design document. Let me make a note for myself to be sure I will do that. So this is not a complete design document. It's just the early phases of a design document. One of the things that we're going to be talking about is to think about the problem before you start writing code. Because most of us, we learn to code before we think about it. And my analogy for that is I'm sitting in a car and driving around, hoping that I can find something. So if I'm driving around my city or a specific city for a restaurant, then maybe I find it. But if I'm driving around and I want to get to a ski resort in Utah, most likely I'm not going to get there for some time soon. So when we are having complex programs, by just starting the code, it's not going to work. For the small ones, maybe it's going to work. So we want to practice that. We want to think about where we want to go, sit down and plan for it, and then we can go. Nowadays, you just put it in the Google map or some maps like that and let it drive you. But you have to put it in there. You cannot just go around and look for it. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about in our design document is called pseudocode. Pseudocode is something between coding and English language. So we are putting our thought into how to write the program. It is not actual code, and I want to get as much coding out of these. This is not coding, because sometimes when I ask students to do the pseudocode, they go write the code and bring it and copy and paste it over here. That's not it. It's just mapping up what we want to do. So in this case, it's talking about the fuel gauge to design an if-else statement to warn a driver when the fuel is low, but tells the driver to bypass pit stops if the fuel is close to full. So otherwise, no input. So we have two things to consider. If the fuel gauge is below 3/4, we're going to look at if the gauge is below 1/4, then we're going to issue the warning. If the gauge is above 3/4, then we're just going to say do not stop. And if the fuel gauge is between 1/4 and 3/4, we are not going to say anything. And one of the things we're going to be learning in programming here is if you don't have nothing to say, we're not going to say anything. So we don't have to say something all the time. Now, first thing first, we always have to keep in mind about integer divided by integer. So if I write this in a code, in a C++ code, and I say 3 divided by 4, and if I put it like that in the code, 3 divided by 4, remember, integer divided by integer will give you integer. So this is going to give me a 0. So if I put this in the code, it's going to give me a 0. 1/4 also is going to give me 0. So I shouldn't be using this. So either I have to put it 3.0 divided by 4, or simply put it as 70.75. And for the other 1.25. So that's something that we're gonna make a habit of looking at. That's what I have been practicing. As soon as I see a division, I check it. I mean, this is very obvious, but we just want to be sure we check it. Okay, so this is the pseudocode. So this is what we understood that we have to do for this problem. So let's move on. So if we just take the pseudocode and translate it to the C++, remember, I can take the pseudocode, give it to anybody, anywhere in the world to write the code for me. And that means it doesn't have to be in the specific language. So they can write it in any language, anytime. That's why we don't put any specific language in the pseudocode. Of course, for development, we're going to have a step between them. So if I'm taking this pseudocode and I do it in Java or I'm doing it in C++, maybe I have some libraries that's going to help me, but that's not for this class for now. So taking that one, it says, okay, if the fuel gauge reading is less than 0.75, and if the fuel gauge is less than 0.25, then it says, okay, it's very low, you better stop for fueling. And else is going to be over 34, don't stop. Now, first thing first, we are organizing this. It's a pretty visual. And the first thing that I'm going to see is, okay, this if and this else looks like they are connected to each other. But C++ connecting the else to the latest if statement. So this else doesn't belong to the first one, it's going to belong to the second one. So it's asking if it's going to be more than 0.25. So actually it's going to give me this reading for, and you can try it out. So this one is going to happen for 1/4 to 3/4, because we came here, we checked to see if it's less than 75, and if it's less than 75 and it's not less than 25, then it's going to be this range. So that's why we have to be careful about this. And of course, always to be sure is to use the braces for everything. We don't have to, but we got to watch out for those. Okay, so we can use the braces. I worked in a company that they were requiring to use braces no matter if it's just one statement to get the confusion out. Remember, when you go to workforce, every company have their own specific way of doing things, and it may or may not be in line of what you learn. So that's the part of the training when you go to a company, especially the bigger ones. So if you look at this one, we can insert some braces so to be able to okay, so some braces for the first if statement. This means what? The second if statement belongs to the first one, and then we're going to have braces for the else. Again, for the second one, maybe you don't really need it, but the first one, you don't need it, but you just want to be sure where you're at with your else statement. So that's what you're going to do. So if it was up to me, I wouldn't put it for the second else, but I definitely put it for the first one to declare where we are with these things. Now, so C++ creators were very good in thinking and fixing things, and they come up with coming up with better way of doing things, and we're going to look at that so we get some of these confusions out. And for that is something called if, else, and then else if. So we can have multiple of those things together. Now, this is a guessing game. So you have a number in your head, and of course in the program we have a number, and then we're going to ask to guess. So if the person you guess low, we're going to tell them that your number is lower than what I have. If they guess high, we're going to say it's high. And if it's exactly the same thing, it's going to be that. We're going to say you got it. So one way of doing that is we're going to check the guess. If the guess is higher than the number, we're going to say it's too high. Else, if the guess is lower than the number, we're going to say it's too low. And if the guess is equal to the number, we're going to say that's correct. Okay. Now, we can rewrite. Remember, you can write the whole thing in one line. But to make it a little nicer than the previous one, what we're going to do is we are going to put the else if next to each other to make it a little easier to read. So the idea of the else if is, if this is correct, it's going to do this, it's not going to do the rest of these things. That's why I wanted to have else if to be sure that if the first one is correct, it's not going to check the rest of these things. So if you have a bunch of if statement, if you don't put the else here, it's going to be checking every single one of them. So that means if I don't have else over here, and I say if guess greater than number, do this. If guess less than number, do this. If guess equal to, so it's going to check all three of them all the time. But if I put the else here, the only time that's going to check the second one if the first one is incorrect or not true. So if I really want to think about this, the most common one, I'm going to put it on the top. So the efficiency of my program is going to be higher. So we got to think about these things as part of the software engineering, not programming. Okay, now that we got this done, let's go into it a little more. So we're going to try to do else if as much as possible. So we're going to go to the next one, meaning that, do I really need the last check? So if the number is too high, we're going to catch it on the first one. If the number is too low, we're going to catch it on the second one. So when we get the third one, do we really need to check it? So if it's not too high and it's not too low, then it has to be exactly the same thing. So I don't have to check it. So I can put it as a comment for myself if I jump in there or somebody is looking at it, but the computer doesn't need to check it. It's already given. So we have to think about these things a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an if, else if, else if, else. The last one, that's not going to be in the rest of those things. We want to have this because if we don't put the last else, then what about the condition that we didn't cover? So we have to think about it that, okay, we have the condition 1, condition 2, condition 3, condition 4. What about if it's none of those things? So we got to think about that and put it out there. All right, so let's look at another example. In here, we're going to say that we are doing the tax computation. If the person is making less than 15,000, there is no tax on it. Between 15,000 and 25,000, there's going to be 5% tax on that amount, 15 to 25. And if it's above 25,000, the first 15,000 is free. The next 10,000 is 5%, and above that is going to be 10%. Now, if we have this, then we're going to be thinking about that, and then we say, okay, so the first one I can check, and again, we're going to go back to these things, and then we can refine it. So the first one, we're going to check it for if it's less than 15,000, the tax bill equal 0. Then we're going to say else if the income is greater than 15,000 and less than or equal 25,000, then we're going to compute it as 5% for the income minus 15,000 because we're going to be doing the 15,000 to 25. And else, so this else, I don't have to check to see if the net income is greater than 25,000 because if it's not less than 15,000 and it is not less than 25,000, it has to be greater than 25,000. I don't need to check it. And then I do my calculation. Now, let's think about this. If I put this tax bill equal 0 when I declare my variable, so if in here, if I had something like double tax bill equal 0, then I don't even need to check. I don't even need to check this one at all because it's already, I don't need to set it, it's already there. Now, another thing that I want to mention here, and we're going to be thinking about this, especially for the first time a programmer, we might see this and then we're going to go back and we're going to refine it. So when I go from the first one, remember in here, what I'm doing is we are checking for if it's less than 15,000. So if it's less than 15,000, it's going to catch over here. If it's not less than 15,000, it's going to go and check the next one. So I don't really need to check if it's greater than 15,000 because when it gets here, it has to be greater than 15,000. Otherwise, it would do the first statement. So I don't really need to check this one. It's already given. So all I need to do is check if it's less than 25,000. Same thing goes with the else. I don't need to check to see if it's greater than 25,000, because if it's not less than 25,000, it has to be greater than 25,000. So some of the things that we going to be thinking about it when we're writing the program, don't let it be stressful. You write the code the original way it's going to work, but you just want to have a little bit of time to go back and look at these things, especially when you're doing the peer review, to kind of refine it. Another thing that I want to mention here is putting the comments to kind of making things more readable. So you put comments, again, this is coming from 2.5, read it again. And then you put some comments to explain your code. That's going to be a good style. Another thing was the formatting output. All of these things are coming from 2.5, that every time you have a double, a decimal number, you want to format it so you can have a nice output. And this is the good way of output, sample diagram. So we want to think about how my output is going to look like, and that way I can format it correctly. Okay, so that's for this part, and I'm going to stop right here, and you can continue to the second part of this section.